Welcome back to AI Diatribe. This is Jason Lowe, your illustrious host for this particular podcast. And today I am joined by none other than Mr. David Petersen, who, by the way, has done a lot of things in the education space with AI. Our last episode, we talked a little bit about education with the gentleman from Northeastern University, and we're going to follow that up with this conversation today with me and David. David has done all the things when it comes to AI and education, and he's still doing all the things, but let's do this. I'm going to back off, and David, I'm going to let you speak for yourself. Welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Can you start out by just giving us maybe like a Cliff Notes version of your background, how you got into AI, how you got into AI in education, where that has led to, and what you're doing now?
Yeah, Jason, thanks so much. And thanks for having me on the show. This is really awesome. So I got into education, like most people that end up in like the instructional curriculum design. You don't grow up thinking, one day I'm going to be an instructional designer. You know, that's never anybody's like childhood dream. I landed in it by accident. One of my professors invited me to come on out to the University of Utah to help launch their MBA online in 2012.
I hear that the University of Utah is the best school in the world.
Best one in the world, I hear. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
and had a great time doing that. We were a really small team, and the dean gave us a budget and said, "You have 1 year. We need you to design, build, market, and launch this program and get it off the ground." And so we had 4 people on our team to start with. Ended up building out their MBA, and then after a couple of years doing that, I was saying, I can do educational technology. I've been building some cool stuff, but I really don't know much about education, So I went on over to England, went to Oxford for 2 years and did a master's degree in education and my MBA over at their business school, and then came on back and have just completed 5 years at Western Governors University, helping to implement design thinking and lead their AI implementation. So I introduced AI at Western Governors back in 2021, and it was before ChatGPT got launched, but we were using it to kind of take a bunch of information and synthesize it down into actionable like learning objectives and things like that for their programs. And so the last work I was doing with them was leading a redesign of their production process so that they can produce courses, content, their programs more efficiently with AI, but still including the value that humans bring to the process. And then working on some experimental stuff where trying to create AI students to go take the courses before they actually launch the program. So you could have an AI student go take the course, and you could have 10,000 students go take the course, different attributes, maybe some have lot less time to study or are neurodivergent or something like that. And then we'd get initial data and then refine a model based off of actual performance later on, so we could improve those like AI persons. So that's what I've been doing, doing some consulting, and really excited to be opening that up. And that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of.
Well, it sounds like you've got some pretty substantial experience in working with AI in education, obviously with the AI content creation stuff that you've done. But I am curious because, the world changed back in November of 2022. It just totally changed because ChatGPT 3 was released, and suddenly we're all kind of going, whoa. Looking through your experience, I did notice that you were running some experiments with GPT-3 and GPT-4. And so in the early days, especially as it pertains to education, I do have a burning question that I actually was thinking about asking you, so I'm going to do it because I can't. So here I am. I'm asking this question. What surprised you the most? Was it the capabilities of large language models as it related to some of this educational work that you're doing, or the limitations of the large language models? And what were those, either the capabilities or the limitations, that surprised you the most?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think both sides were surprising. First of all, I'd been into the literature on natural language processing before, so I kind of knew there's a cool book called the Bestseller Code, and this is out of Stanford, a professor out of there that wrote this probably a decade ago now. But they took a corpus of 500 books and all the bestsellers for like the last decade. And they had, before they had this LLM, massive data processing capabilities, they broke those down and they figured out what makes a bestseller. There's like 4 different key attributes that they identified. But it was cool because it kind of taught me about how these large language models work. So some of the capabilities really surprised me. GPT works by predicting the next sentence, the next words in a sentence. And the fact that they could train any algorithm to be able to produce text that is of that quality, especially now where it's getting to be, you're able to pick it out with a trained eye, but most people won't be able to distinguish human written content from AI written content. And it continues to converge. It's like when you learn about anything in mathematics and it just blows your mind. The idea that math could produce human sounding language is incredible to me. And I think that the limitations on it, especially in the early days, and they're doing a lot of work to kind of correct this, but the amount of hallucinations in those early models where they will just agree with you and go completely crazy. Even before GPT-3, 3.5, I was using a model called Da Vinci, and they've retired that model in OpenAI. But it was an instruction model. We were using it to take a bunch of different skills that the workforce was requiring, and then boil that down into competencies that we would teach at our competency-based university. And sometimes it would just go off on crazy tangents, crazy hallucinations. And sometimes the information would be inaccurate, incomplete, completely off topic. And so those were some of the initial thoughts. And more, I think that it's pushing us to the edge of human capability now. We have the OpenAI models that can do better than 99% of law students on the LSAT, or I don't know what it is on the SAT, but I think it's in the 99th percentile on the SAT now. And the question is becoming, what is the role of humans in knowledge and knowledge creation? And what is it that we're bringing to the picture that is most important versus what could be done more efficiently, more effectively So it's really leading to a lot of interesting conversations in the education space, especially when we have what traditionally has been, a way of training our brains. But now we're using that artificial intelligence. And there's some really interesting similarities and divergences, differences between, the way humans think and the way that artificial intelligence thinks.
Well, let's talk about that for a second because it's important. We need to pay attention to both because ultimately, I think we all feel that AI is going to step up and take a much larger role in education as time goes along. And you and I are probably going to discuss that a little bit further in the podcast as far as like the effect of what it's going to have on human beings in the education space. But we're training AI in a way that is dissimilar to how you train humans. Yet the paradox is that we're training AI so that they can train humans. So how does this work? I mean, how is it that we make sure that we're training AI effectively if we can't train AI the same way we train humans to make sure that it can effectively train humans? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, AI is fundamentally different than the way that humans think. Because there's a really famous paper called the Magic Number 7 plus or minus 2. It's basically introduced the idea of our working memory. You and I, we can think about 7 things. Once we start adding on more and more and more, you can remember about 7 digits of a number. That's why our telephone numbers are the length that they are. But if you add more and more and more information, your brain has to do different tricks. It has to break that information up into chunks and then memorize those chunks separately. And it needs to, when you're making a decision, you're really probably weighing like 3 to 4 factors without aid. You can kind of figure out how to pull different levers different way. But if you have a situation like in today's economy, making very complex decisions, AI can ingest just insane amounts of data that our brains cannot comprehend. And then it can identify very, very tiny correlations between that data. And so Yuval Noah Harari just put out a book called Nexus, which I highly recommend for this, but it dives deep into this. And he talks about how when you used to get a mortgage 80 years ago, you walk on down to your local branch of a bank, someone that you knew, You showed them that you had a job and they gave you a loan. And it was largely a human act based on trust that you would pay that loan back. Today, though, data brokers have information about every purchase you've ever made, every credit card you own, every transaction that you've done. They know your buying habits. There's so much information about us that's gathered through our interactions with technology. And maybe there's a correlation. And so when you submit a loan application now, they're weighing your credit score based off of your entire life history of credit. And maybe they found out that you canceled your Hulu subscription, and that has a 0.000001% effect on the likelihood of you paying off a 30-year loan, and because maybe if you're canceling your Hulu subscription, you're feeling a little bit more financially strained, it's like those kind of things that it could take into a nearly infinite number of factors. And so where you and I are used to making decisions based off of 3 or 4 things, there could be 1,000 different factors on whether Jason or David gets a loan. And that's largely unintelligible. Even if you had the data, even if you made the data available, we decide to decline your loan application. It doesn't matter because humans wouldn't be able to figure it out anyway. Like, okay, there's a correlation between my Hulu subscription and you would never be able to figure out why the decision became negative and what the tipping point on that is. And so it's an interesting difference between human and AI cognition.
Very much so. And there's 2 things that come to mind. One, I don't think I'll be canceling my Hulu anytime soon. But 2, this directly translates to a lot of the good that's happening in the medical space. For example, something I've talked about on previous episodes, and I don't know if you're aware of this, David, or not, but there was an experiment done where they fed a whole bunch of medical information into a deep learning model, including biomarkers and voice prints and physical attributes and all these different things, and said, find some consistencies somewhere, somehow that allows you to diagnose something in the medical space. And the thing that it found was it could tell by listening to someone's voice print within an 80% certainty whether that individual had type 2 diabetes or not.
What? No way. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, hello, just by listening to the voice print of someone, you could tell that they have type 2 diabetes with an 80% success rate. So, yeah, you're talking about something very, very valid as it relates to pattern recognition and analysis of data and drawing correlations that we as human beings we don't have the scope. We don't have that kind of capability to really draw that stuff together without some sort of heavy computational power, of which AI and deep learning, machine learning can certainly do. But let's kind of circle this back. I do have a question as it relates to education and the use of AI that's a little bit related. You talked a little bit about standardization, scaling, different things like that. So AI, I think, and this is just Jason saying this, but AI, I think, has a really great possibility to personalize education for individuals, teach them in a way that's going to be optimal for them to learn certain things. It can cater to people's learning styles. Okay, you're a little bit more used to visual. Okay, great. Let's make some visual representations of things so that you can learn this stuff better. You're a little better at learning things by listening to lectures. Okay, let's feed it to Notebook LM and get some sort of a podcast. You're better at doing something. Great. So let's use agentic AI to have someone that interacts with you and walks through actually doing something versus observing. AI will personalize education as we move forward. But there also needs to be standardization in education for scalability and for fairness. Does AI do away with the need for standardization in the case of scalability? Does AI do away with the need for fairness because it is so individualized of an experience that it's just simply doing its best to optimize for that person? And can we be fair in that type of a scenario?
That's a fantastic question. So I think that we're at a crossroads with AI and in education with this role for standardization. For a long time, we've had standardized tests as one of the largest markers or metrics for the educational system. And there's been criticism of standardized tests since the beginning of time, right? Like, oh, you're not really testing learning, you're testing the ability to take a test. There's truth to parts of that. But overall, I think you can see, at least at a statistical level, that standardized tests give one indication of ability. I do think that AI is going to enable personalization for education in a way that we've not been able to before. It's like the beginning of mass customization back when automobiles were, just started. There was just one way you could get it. You could get your car and it had to be painted black because that's the only option that it made. And then you see this proliferation of automobiles in every kind of style, in every kind of power, horsepower, all of those sort of things. And now you can get a car any flavor you want. But there are still ways of measuring the ability of a car. And there are still ways that we're going to have to be able to measure cognitive ability because it plays a lot of different roles. It plays an economic role, and we have to be able to, out of a university or out of a high school, show to employers that somebody is going to be able to do their job. That's one dimension. I also think, though, that there are other subtler dimensions. I think that education, and this is kind of additionally like goes into where does the human come out of the AI and what's unique about humans. So AI doesn't have to worry about playing nice with its neighbors. It doesn't need to be a good citizen. It doesn't need to ensure that they remain a contributor in a society. It's kind of isolated in its data center and kind of doing its thing. And we are fundamentally social beings. I think that one of the ways that a university is really powerful is if we can bring people together and practice democratic education, where it's how do we work together? One of my favorite experiences in England was the Oxford Union, where they put all of their debates. It's their 200-year-old debating society. And I never participated, but I loved going to watch them because they go together and they just clash. Both sides are extremely intelligent, but they would have dialogue that would just rip each other's points apart, and that was part of the experience of seeing people come together and disagree vehemently on very fundamental questions, but then do it in a peaceful way, do it in a way that was constructive ultimately for everyone. And I think that in a world where we live right now with algorithms and AI optimizing our feeds and sowing seeds of just outrage, the outrage machine, and in that siloed connection, situation, like I think that a university could be an amazing place to foster those kind of democratic values. I say that, and I'm immediately drawn to what happened recently down at Utah Valley University with Charlie Kirk. Wherever you fall on the political spectrum, something that I appreciated about what his movement was doing was going to a place where he would get a lot of very pointed questions and he engaged rigorously in debate. Love him or hate him, he was practicing democracy. And though the universities need to be a safe place for that sort of thing to happen.
I would agree. And you raise a really, really good point that AI is completely customizing the algorithms of the videos and the posts that we see in social media. There's no reason why it can't completely customize, education efforts specifically for individuals. But this also begs a question. You mentioned, how do we gauge whether someone is actually cognitively or with enough horsepower between their ears capable for the position that they're applying for? How do we gauge that intelligence? And we'll talk about my 5 C's in just a few minutes. But one thing that this leads to is a discussion about, is AI a tool or is it a crutch? In the education arena, is it the calculator or is it a computer doing the calculations for you? Because we all know that when the calculator came out, everybody freaked out. Parents didn't want their kids using calculators and schools didn't want people using calculators. They wanted them to do their arithmetic by hand. And, now calculators are kind of, geez, you can't walk 10 steps without hitting 100 different calculators in people's pockets. But there's also the whole academic integrity element of this, not only by use of the students, but also in the research arena and the publishing arena, because AI has augmented individuals' ability to rapidly create papers and publish papers so much faster and at such higher volume. Where does this end? There's got to be some sort of a breaking point where people realize that, okay, we need to compartmentalize how AI is going to be used in the education arena, not only from a student's perspective, but also from a researcher's perspective. And what other ethics should we be worried about? I mean, what are some of the ethical concerns that we need to be laser focused on initially in these early days of AI starting to play such a massive role in education?
You raise a lot of great points here, both from a student perspective. I see them addressing, universities beginning to address this, and some good research being done in the authentic assessment space. And so this is having people, instead of taking a multiple choice question, quiz, or even, there's some Harvard professors requiring handwritten exams, in a blue book or something like that. I don't see that as being a long-term solution to the academic integrity question. I think that people with tools, cheating is as old as education, but I also think that this is an incredible tool that could be used for so much good. And so it's going to depend on fostering more of the desire to learn and creating conditions and space for students to be able to do that. And so that's an easy thing to say, a harder thing to implement. One of the tactical things that people are doing right now is creating authentic assessment, where it's not just doing a multiple choice quiz or exam, but creating something that has real world value. And so is it a project? Is it an output that requires reflection, that requires iteration? Even if you're using AI, at least now, at the beginning, currently, the stuff that you're getting out is not a finished product. It's not a polished work of art. Something that I've seen in when I've been using AI, it ends up creating so much that then boiling that down into the nuggets of what's worth keeping, you have to whittle that back down. And so I think that there's going to be this iterative cycle, and I can see people either creating new forms of assessment that are more authentic to actual tasks and real world applications, or having people say, use AI as much as you want, but we're setting a standard that is hard to achieve even with AI. And I'm expecting a polished product that is going to require iterative work with you. And so I think that there are different ways of approaching that, but I think on the student side, that's some approaches I've been seeing. And then on the faculty side, yeah, there's instances where faculty have generated slide decks directly out of ChatGPT, and they've been caught by their students, in a course where they're not allowed to use ChatGPT on their assignments. There's all of these funny news stories of things that are happening. But on the publishing side, that's really important, because especially in fields like medicine or other scientific fields, we want to be fostering a culture of rigorous science and not just publication or, publish or perish. I think that while we will be accelerating, it's going to be a question of attention span. Whenever there is a time that proliferates content, we saw this with the advent of social media, we saw this with the advent of the internet. We said, what are we going to do with all of this content? No one's ever going to be able to read this. With the internet, we developed first directories like DMOZ, if you remember that, and Yahoo, and then we developed search engines that were much better able to whittle that ginormous amount of content back down into a manageable scale. It goes back to our working memory. We just can't deal with so much content, the information overload. And then with social media, even more content comes onto the scene, and we have prioritized different algorithms. Those are obviously fraught with all sorts of ethical considerations, but I think we will see the same kind of approach whenever AI is just proliferating huge amounts of content, some of which, of varying degrees of quality. We are going to find new mechanisms to help narrow that back down to a manageable scale so that a human will be able to do that. And so I see in research, I see some really positive applications being used. There's a site called LitMaps that uses the links in all published papers to kind of give you a mind map of related literature. So it's never been so easy to do a lit review as now. You can go out and you can type in any topic. You can get the 1,000 most seminal works on that topic. Ben Syllabus is another project that does that. They scrape every syllabus across the country, or they have 11 million syllabi. And you can say, okay, I'm teaching a course in, computer science. 101, what is being taught across the country. And you can see what textbooks are being used, what anything like that. I'm working right now with a publisher on a book about AI in education. And in my contract, it has clauses about disclosure and use of AI. And they don't want us to be writing it, just using ChatGPT. So we have to disclose every time we use AI in a log to the publisher. There's all sorts of ethical considerations, though. The amount of content that was ingested by the AI companies, and they're still eating content. The New York Times is suing OpenAI because of copyright infringement, and a bunch of publishers are in that same space.
Which was settled, by the way.
Did they just get settled? I'll have to check that out. Yeah, it's a really interesting space to be in.
It is, for sure. We're also dealing with an interesting position. Going back to the skills portion that you were talking about, what skills are people going to really be able to need? So this is a good time for me to bring up my 5 C's. So I've kind of been talking a little bit about 5 skills that I see as being important. Let me throw these out there and get your take on this and tell me if I'm high or if I'm, on, or, you tell me. So I see these 5 things as being really, really critical in working with AI moving forward, because we all know that AI is eventually, at some point, going to lead to the commoditization of knowledge and labor, really, when we get right down to it, with robotics becoming so good so rapidly. So what is it that human beings are going to need to have in order to work with these different AI entities, but also each other? So these 5 skills that I'm talking about are communication, because you need to be able to talk to AI, but you also need to be able to talk to each other. Collaboration, because you need to be able to work with AI effectively and other people. You can communicate till the cows come home, but unless you can collaborate effectively and actually work together jointly on something, you're not going to do a whole heck of a lot of good. But then you also need curiosity, and that's going to drive new knowledge, and it's going to drive new methodology and new ways to utilize AI. Tightly coupled with curiosity would be creativity, because you need to be curious about things, but you also have to be creative in how you're going to incorporate these new things that you're thinking about. And the last skill that I think is really going to be uber important, probably the most critical of them all, would be critical thinking as a skill. So your thoughts on those 5?
Like that framework. I think I agree with you. I think critical thinking will be one of the most it is already, but will continue to be, and increasingly be, the most critical skill for people. It's going to be interesting to see what AI does to our knowledge silos, because we've seen social media really polarize society. And I think depending on how AI is governed and aligned to human values, we could see it help foster critical thinking and even metacognition. Just like, why are you approaching this problem this way? Thinking about our thinking. But we need to find a way for us to push back on our own cognition, being reflective about ourselves, being reflective about the information we're consuming. And I could see us creating systems. I think that's still up in the air. It's still to be seen if we'll land this design problem. But yeah, I think that critical thinking is going to be paramount. With creativity, the guy that invented the theory of flow, kind of being in the zone, he also did this model of creativity, which I love. His name's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and never try to write that down. It's impossible to spell. But he worked at Claremont Graduate University, and he talked about there's really 3, it's kind of like a Venn diagram. You have to have a domain of accepted knowledge, a community that practices and kind of gatekeeps the accepted knowledge, and then you have to have innovation. And the innovation is new stuff that you want to add into the community. And so as a person, I create a new contribution that gets voted in, in or off the island when I create something new. And that process, it's a system of creativity. It's not like a sociological view of creativity where humans guard their accepted knowledge. And with creativity, I think AI unlocks a huge amount of potential because it's very good at generating stuff. And that tends to be where humans are less good. There's paperclip studies. How many uses can you find for this object studies? And kids end up doing incredibly well. And that diminishes over time cognitively as our brains become more and more specialized into adulthood. But AI is very good at divergent thinking. It seems to be less good at the convergent thinking. And that happens to be where humans tend to excel. So when we can see a bunch of options on the menu, you can go through and pick the ones you like. That's awesome. That's a really good way to do that. And
See,
that's,
I don't know that I agree with you. This is just,
yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
not disagreeing completely, but I don't see AI being Einstein anytime soon. I don't see AI being Mozart anytime soon. And so there is specialization, yes, and there is convergency, but convergency does lead itself to accelerated capabilities in specific areas, which with the certain types of people's brains and the way they work allows them to then be creative and think outside the box and maybe come up with something new that AI wouldn't be able to do so on its own. So when I say creativity, I think that's kind of where I'm lending it towards. You're right. There are definitely certain ways that creativity can be exhibited by AI in recombining things that it's already been trained on in new and different ways. I mean, let's ask it for a picture of Superman. It grabs the cape from this picture and it grabs the hairdo from that one and it grabs the S logo from that one and, Lois Lane in Superman's arms from this one. It's a new combination of all of these different things into something that is unique and relatively new. So is that creativity? Yes, it's recombinatory creativity. It's not truly intuitive and, shall we say, original creativity in the sense. And so I think that's kind of where I go
Yeah,
with
that's a
as
good
far as
point.
creativity.
I agree with you there.
Okay.
I like that example. I think that as you use AI jointly with a human in an iterative cycle, you go through periods of divergent thinking and then convergent thinking and divergent thinking and convergent. If you do a couple of cycles with that, I think you approach something that is pretty nuanced, something that could be pushing frontiers of originality. I don't know if that's true. I have an intuition that it seems to me like through the iterative cycle, you can get to a place that's pretty creative. But I agree with you. I've looked on Sona, which is a music generating AI. I don't see them hitting the top of the charts anytime soon. It's cool that it can create a song about anything at the drop of a hat, and I'm not listening to it yet. But I think that with humans continuing to do iteration with that, you could come up with something that's kind of cool. I don't know. I haven't heard anything that I would listen to like long, long term, but who's to say if someone put all their work into that, maybe they could come up with something that was valuable, just like a screenwriter or a songwriter, uses a creative process. It's not just a one-time creative event.
Well, we are reaching a point where that whole threshold of being able to be truly creative, the moat we have on AI in that respect is diminishing. I mean, the moat everywhere is diminishing. I was listening to an interview yesterday that someone had with the chief scientist at OpenAI talking about what they see coming in the next year or at the most two. And one of the things he did mention was that they are on the cusp, or he feels it within the next year. Research AI entities are going to be able to originally think and come up with their own hypotheses and their own experiments, conduct those experiments, and publish on their own, which is really interesting from an academic perspective and a scientific perspective, but also in this realm of how valuable is creativity going to be and in what areas of the world will creativity, at least human creativity, come to be most valued. Because if this is truly going to happen within the next year, we're talking about entering a time of recursive discovery, recursive scientific and academic discovery, which is going to be basically the launching point of all knowledge. It's just going to get absolutely batshit crazy from that point forward. It's going to go nuts. And so I'm excited for that point. It's got some harbinger of doom element to it too, because who knows where it's going to go once it figures out all the things. But it really is a very exciting time. That's going to have a pretty big effect. And again, that also has an impact on just how important is creativity going to be in the grand scheme of things. What do you see as far as like emerging trends in education as it relates to artificial intelligence? What's coming in the short term versus what's coming in the long term? Tell me something that we haven't discussed yet. Tell me something that we haven't thought of yet that you see as being important as it relates to education with AI.
I think apart from just general personalization, I think it's going to be aligning different aspects of your life into a coherent narrative journey. Uh, a university education right now, there are some basic rites of passage and also just general like flow to the experience where you come on in, you're excited freshman, you get to be a sophomore and you've gained some, skills at questioning things, and people tend to like really go out and question a ton, during that year, and then they start finding kind of a pathway towards, they start thinking about, like where am I going to go post university, what career trajectory. And as they get to senior, they're getting more and more aligned to like their job and things like that. It's hard to switch though between, a lot of students will do this like sophomore year, junior year, and they say, I don't want to be a biologist. I want to go into, computer science and pivot so quickly. I think we're going to be able to see a lot of crosswalking. I think we're going to be able to see a lot more pathways. So you see education as kind of like, it'll become much more of a buffet, kind of take what you want, and there'll be ways of connecting everything that we don't have right now. I'm hoping that that's true, and I think it is, because there will be transferable skills between domains, in some aspects, but you'll be able to move more freely, I think, through academia. I also see it being able to become a more integrated experience in your life. You read a lot of things for fun, you watch a lot of YouTube videos, you're watching other things, and pulling that data into your education and having your experience, recorded and coalesced. There's some work on something called the Experience API, which is taking in account of non-formal learning environments. So I think that we're going to see hyper-personalization. I think we're going to be able to go to someone's cognitive ability, like right on the edge of their cognitive ability. We actually see this in a really cool place called Alpha School. It's a K-12 experience. It's a charter school that they have their students go for 2 hours with an AI instructor every day, and they are in the 99th percentile across all standardized tests for their kids, because it knows exactly where the kid's ability is and it's pushing them. And that's actually right where Csikszentmihalyi's flow idea comes in, where it's like when you're in the zone, you're just right on the edge of your ability. It's challenging, but it's not too challenging. It's giving you exactly what you want. So I see, in a positive way, a dawn of education where it could keep all of our students right on the edge of their seat, excited about what they're learning and helping tailor it to their interests and help expand what their interests are. I think that could be a really positive outcome of this and make it an exciting experience. And then at Alpha School, the rest of the day, they do team building, interpersonal skills, creative projects, collaboration. They're teaching like real world skills. So they'll have people set up a business together or film a movie or do something like that. And it's pulling on the 5 C's that you're talking about and really fostering those kind of skills. Those are some of the cool things I see coming out of this.
Well, very cool. I'm looking forward to the future. That's for dang sure. It's going to be a very fun and exciting place. So the last question I'll ask you is this, and just take 30 seconds and just give me one thing. One. If you could recommend one thing for people that are looking to get started in utilizing AI in their education, what's the best advice that you would give them? What's the one thing you would tell them?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that for me, I would encourage people to find ways of incorporating AI constructively into their classroom. I don't think that holding off and saying, don't use your computers, turn your laptops off, let's go back to writing by hand all of our assignments is going to be a winning strategy in this situation. It was kind of like this when I was going through school with Wikipedia. Everybody said, no using Wikipedia as a source. Now, they've done tons of studies. Wikipedia is more accurate than Encyclopedia Britannica before they took it offline. I think that we don't need to be afraid of it, but I think we need to model as educators how to use AI responsibly. And that's what I would try to push for, is saying, how do you incorporate AI in a responsible way so that you're practicing things like creativity, like collaboration, and in the human traits that are essential to us that we're developing, use AI all you want, but make sure that we're giving people appropriate credit, that we're validating, our critical thinking, challenge what you're doing. One of the things that we did at Oxford, I'd studied 40 hours a week reading on my own. Our class periods were 90 minutes once a week. And we would go, you know, and collaborate and discuss things as a group. But then the assessment was boil everything you learned down this term into one essay. Prove to me that you know everything that we covered, like all that we covered. You got 5,000 words, and distill that knowledge down into, poetry, basically. It was a 10-page essay or something like that with 50 citations in it, and you're going through and like every point by point, you're trying to call out the knowledge. So that synthesis and pushing towards that, I think that's possible now with using AI. You could go and BS an assignment with OpenAI really fast. It's not going to be polished. It's not going to be perfect. And so having the student own their points and then the instructor modeling critical thinking, looking at an assignment and saying, why did you choose to submit an assignment where you asserted X, Y, or Z? Do you see the logical problems here? Why didn't we push that harder? Like, could we have explored that more, even using AI? Get some other perspectives here. I think it's going to become a question of refining our knowledge, challenging what AI proposes and things like that, putting in original perspectives, and then getting assignments. So that's kind of my spiel. It would be embrace the use of it, but do it in a way that is challenging students and modeling for students reflective, thoughtful use of AI, not just kicking garbage out.
Fair advice. And I see value in that for sure. As a adjunct instructor myself, it is something that I am facing on a regular basis. How do we incorporate AI into doing these things, and how do we allow students to use these tools in the right way without short-circuiting their ability to learn and actually ingest the concepts that we're trying to teach? So I feel you. All right, David, thank you for taking the time today. This has been really, really good. A wide and divergent discussion. So appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's been it's been awesome.